The lynch mob, which stoned Stephen to death, are blind with anger and fury. They can't see anything. But Paul, young Saul, he watches. But what does he see? I think that Saul is caught between two quite different ways of seeing the victory of goodness. One way we can identify with the angry young man, and the other we can associate with Paul, the convert, to whom this cathedral is dedicated. You see, every culture, every religion needs a story about the victory of goodness. Otherwise, our lives have got no meaning, our sufferings are without hope, and we have no future. The people in front of this cathedral, the protesters, are deeply angry at the inequalities that are tearing our world apart. They're giving voice to a feeling that it's wrong, that there should be this great gulf between the richest and the rest. It's simply wrong. Goodness must triumph. Justice must prevail. But what does that mean? And I think if you look at this reading, we see that young Saul is caught between two different ideas of what it means for goodness to have the victory. On the one hand, he sees this man Stephen, who's attacking all that he most loves, the law, the temple where God dwells with his people. He sees this man as a traitor, and he must be wiped out. He must be got rid of. For young Saul, that's the victory of goodness. Wipe out the evil. And then he goes after the Christians. But I think he's also fighting against another understanding of the victory of goodness. It's said that when they looked at Stephen, he looked like an angel. And who remembered that if not Saul? You have this radiant figure, calm, serene, in the middle of the raging mob. And he asks for their forgiveness. Don't lay this charge against them. Saul's name means in Hebrew, prayed for. And here is this man who he considers evil, praying for him. Stephen is the first martyr, which means witness. And he witnesses the Son of God standing beside his Father in glory. This is the innocent victim who forgives everybody. This is the victory of goodness that doesn't demand that anybody be crushed, anybody be thrown out, anybody be the scapegoat. Everybody has got a place. And that's the vision of goodness which Saul will eventually arrive at Damascus. He isn't ready for it yet. He's raging, he's angry, he's a fanatic. In Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, George Smiley says of Carla, his Russian opponent, he's a fanatic. And a fanatic is somebody who nurses a secret doubt. Young Saul is fighting against a doubt. He's fighting against what he's seen in the martyrdom of Stephen. So when he hears the voice on the road, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" he flips. He's been primed to go off with a bang ever since he saw the death of Stephen. At this moment, our society is deeply divided. The human community is sundered by a terrible gap between the richest and especially those who are most poor. This is unfair. It's wrong. Goodness must have the victory. But what victory? 2,000 years after the death of Stephen, our common imagination of the victory of the good is still that of young Saul. Find the bad and get rid of them. Most films lead up to a denouement when the good and the bad are locked in combat, and surprise, surprise, the bad get wiped out. That's our catharsis. Things are then okay for a little while, and then we have to find somebody else to get rid of. Usually, it ends up in a court scene, and the bad person goes to jail. Jane Malcolm wrote, "Hey, we got the killer, don't worry. You can go to the playground, nothing's going to happen." Even more often, the bad get killed. I saw 2 films on consecutive nights, Avatar and Sherlock Holmes. Completely different. The first one is about 8-foot-tall blue Californians living on a distant planet, and the second one is about our great Sherlock Holmes fighting crime not far from here. But they end in just the same way, which is the shootout at the OK Corral. When Osama bin Laden was killed, the code name for the operation was Geronimo. Can you imagine it? The name of a Native American seen as the symbol of evil which we have to get rid of. Now, I think that the great task of the church and of St. Paul's Cathedral is to shift from the imagination of Saul to that of Paul. Sure, we got to be involved in discussions about reforming the banking system, forms of taxation, perhaps the Tobin tax, whatever. These are very important to discuss. But the fundamental role of the church is much more difficult and important, which is to change our imagination, what the victory of goodness looks like. Stephen sees the innocent victim standing by the right hand of God, the one who forgives everybody, who makes a place for Stephen, for Saul, for the persecutors. The church, you see, is like the community of Cannery Row in Steinbeck's novel of that name. He said its inhabitants are whores, pimps, gamblers, sons of bitches, by which he means everybody. But he might have said saints and angels, martyrs, holy people, and he would have meant the same thing. So how can we witness to this other imagination? Stephen was stoned to death Now, most pictures show people hurling stones at him, rather like an Aunt Sally in a fair, trying to knock off the coconuts. It would not have been like that. A stoning, Stephen would have been laid flat on the ground, and one after another people would have come up with great heavy stones and dropped them on his chest until he was dead. The Mishnah says that if he turns over, if the person turns over on there and face down, turn them back, they must face upright, stone after stone, crushing them. At this moment, there is a vast anger which can make us blind, like the lynch mob, and want to stone people to death, to crush them. Bankers, especially, are becoming hated figures, reviled. In the riots in July, people hurled rocks at banks, smashed their windows. Of course, the bonuses that they receive are obscene, and that must be reformed. They're harmful above all to the bankers and the rest of society. But they too are part of our community. We need them. To lynch them is not the victory of goodness. Outside this cathedral, there's a whole village of tents. St. Paul was a tent maker. He would have had a professional interest. And they are articulating a great cry of all those who are in danger of being forgotten, made invisible. There is in our society a growing contempt for those who are not wealthy. And Jones wrote in a recent book, the members of the working classes are demonized by the tabloid press and by popular television, shown as feckless welfare junkies who drink too much, smoke too much, eat too much, breed too much, and make bad parents. They have become the regular butts in the media's theatre of cruelty. He quotes a well-known television personality who said, do you think that some people shouldn't be allowed to be parents? Like people living in council estates. They're seen as dangerous and to be locked up. The poor only became visible with the beginning of Christianity. In the pagan world, they were not seen. It's only with Christianity that they came to have faces in the light of Christ and be seen as our brothers and our sisters, the naked, the sick, those in prison. When Mother Teresa was once going to a party of the great and the good, she stopped outside the door and started to talk to a beggar. And the important people inside became impatient. Finally, somebody was sent to get her. And she said, can't you see I'm talking to Christ? Already in the Enlightenment, about the time that this cathedral was being rebuilt, the poor are beginning to disappear from visibility. They're seen as the mob, the crowd, the chaotic, turbulent people. In our aggressively secular West, they are in danger of disappearing from sight. In a wonderful novel, The Elegance of the Hedgehog, Marielle Barbary describes the life of a highly intelligent, Parisian concierge who is invisible to the wealthy people in her block of flats. They can't imagine that somebody like that could really feel. She says to rich people, it must seem that the ordinary little people do not experience human emotions with any intensity, were merely concierge. It was given that death for us must be a matter of course, whereas for our privileged neighbours, it carried all the weight of injustice. So we have to shed the light of Christ on these many people who are disappearing from sight in our society, often with no future, no prospects, no jobs, stopped by the police frequently, because without them, we're incomplete. And if we don't claim them as our own, terrible violence and social chaos lie ahead. And research published this week by Bernardo's showed that many people regard the young as the enemy. Almost half of the British population think that the young are like animals, violent, dangerous. The teenage boys are yobs. We have to claim them too as part of our life. What future does a society have which hates its own young? For others, it's Muslims or immigrants. So our society is in terrible danger of falling apart. The usual reaction, the reaction of Saul, is to find somebody to blame and get rid of them. And then, for a little while, we're safe and we're one until we need another victim. So the church has to sustain a different imagination of what the victory of goodness looks like. It's difficult. It took time for Saul to get there. He fought against it. The instinct to accuse and cast out is deep within every one of us. Now, Stephen, you may have noticed at the beginning of the reading today, initially he rants and he raves. He attacks the Israelites. And he attacks his accusers. But then he sees the Son of Man in glory standing beside God, and everything changes. He becomes serene. He can imagine forgiveness. We will only be able to offer our other way of seeing things, our new imagination, if we are rooted in contemplative prayer, that tranquility in which we gaze upon the Son of God in his victory, the one who forgives everybody, who welcomes everybody, who wants no one thrown out. I expect many of you have seen the film of Gods and Men. I'm sure. I hope so. If not, you must go as soon as possible. It's a true story about a small community of Trappist monks in Algeria who were murdered in '96. They were deeply embedded in the local Muslim village. They loved and were loved. And then you see the rise of militant terrorism. On the one hand, the terrorists say you must side with us. And then on the other hand, the government demands their allegiance. They're caught in this violence. and yet they accept everybody. And they're able to because their eyes are fixed on the Son of God who's lifted up. They call the terrorists our brothers from the mountain. There's an extraordinary scene where they're praying in their chapel, which is considerably smaller than St. Paul's Cathedral, and this helicopter menacingly hovers over them. And they cling together and they sing Au Père des Lumières, which we will sing when I finish in just a moment. O Father of light, eternal light and source of all light, you illuminate us at the threshold of night with the radiance of your face. The shadows for you are not shadows. For you, the night is as clear as the day. This is a time of night. There's violence in the air. But our churches, and this great church dedicated to St. Paul, can be places of tranquility and contemplation, where we're able to lift up our eyes and see the one who stands at God's right hand and who forgives all and who has space for everyone.